It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday. And there are a lot of comments this week, mainly on the Lola Bunny video. But that was one of those things where people were just providing their opinions, and I don't feel the need to respond because people are allowed to have their opinions, except in one case, and that ties into the gaslighting video. You were not imagining it if you saw Wellness Wednesday on Tuesday. That was not me trying to gaslight you. I must have hit a wrong button on YouTube. I am having ongoing struggles with YouTube uploading. Long story short, I must have not set up the schedule properly, or there was a glitch in YouTube. I'm pretty sure I did it. The setting just didn't take. But anyway, you did not imagine that showed up early. But apparently this is the right video to do that. If you like this sort of content, Wellness Wednesday does not do as well as my other content, but it helps a lot of people. So I am sticking with the segment, but it helps a lot. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Financial support like Patreon allows me to do stuff like Wellness Wednesday that doesn't do as well traffic-wise. But helps people because I don't have to worry about traffic for money, if that makes any sense. I can worry about the quality of content. Speaking of, statistics and stuff like that, we are coming up on a new milestone for me. I am 2 followers away from 28,000 followers on this channel. So that's good for me. I know that's still that's a mid-size YouTube channel, but we celebrate every milestone, right? So the one thing, and like I said, this ties into the gaslighting comment, because understanding how bad gaslighting has been for so long on such a large scale with people has made me rethink some of the commentary, like some of the comments I get on the channel. It's made me reframe it. And this is an example. I made a comment in the video where, white straight dudes didn't have, an understanding of the fear that, women and minorities and gay people were going through in the, the early to mid years of the AIDS epidemic. That does not mean men weren't scared. That does not mean men thought they had nothing. White straight men did not feel like they had anything to worry about. That's not what it means. It means it's different. That's it. Like, it's difficult to relate to unless you're there. That's all it means. And the number of people who read in that I was saying white men had no fear. This to me, like I said, is an indication of that message being sent somewhere. And people have become so raw from that message that they're reading it in when it's not present. And I think that it benefits everybody to get past that somehow. And I mean that not all men hashtag was trending again on Twitter. And I don't know why, but because by the time I looked into it, it seemed like it was just a bunch of people saying not all men, oh my God, like dunking on the idea of not all men do bad stuff. We do have serious issues with messaging, and we have for some time, with this collectivist lumping of people together. And I use collectivist as a very specific, deliberately chosen term. Because, some people would say identity politics, but I think that's the wrong issue. I think that it's good to recognize that people have different experiences based on the assumptions the world makes about them. Everybody does. And it's important to recognize that people are going to have different experiences based on, race, gender and subcategory gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic class, and poverty and socioeconomic class aren't quite the same thing, because then you get into like the old money and the new money. Like, you can have a ton of money but not have access to certain corridors of power, right? Like, it's a complicated thing. And I think we can all agree, we can all accept that, yes, of course that affects your experience, right? The problem happens when, and, we saw this in, we see this in elections, and when people start assuming that all members of a very big identity group think the same way, react the same way. Like, a lot of the categories we put people in are so artificial, right? Like, oh, all women want the same thing. Sounds absurd, right? Like, 50% of the population want the same things. We don't assume that all men want the same things. Well, in some cases we do. We've talked about this, but you know what I mean? Like, this, we have white college educated, white non-college educated men and women, but then we're like black voters, Latino voters, like Latin voters. People don't like Latino. I refuse to use Latinx. So I use Latin, Latine, whatever, Latin. But why would you assume that this collection of people lumped together based on language is going to all vote the same way? Someone from Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, Puerto Rico, where if you're like a 45th generation Texan or Arizonan that happens to be Hispanic, this is a totally artificial collective identity, right? Totally artificial. And then people are like, gee, why did some of these Hispanics vote one way and the other way? Like, why aren't you all voting the same way? This is because it's an artificial grouping, right? I really think collectivism in that regard, like clumping people into artificial groups, has really gotten in the way of understanding. And it's a form of gaslighting, right? Which intersectionalism was supposed to take care of, and people just say, I'm an intersectionalist, and then they use this weird collectivist approach to things, right? We really need to value individuals more. And we can't do that if we're obsessively lumping people into groups. I was talking on Twitch yesterday about the fact that, if you assume what someone's reactions are going to be based on gender, you're only going to be right 3 out of 4 times, because 25% of the population is documented not sex typical in their interests and stuff like that, right? Their reactions, their big 5 personality, this guy. I'm not typical, right? I'm part of that 25%. And people end up getting mad at me because I don't fit neatly in that box, right? And I said the question, that's the philosophical question, right? If you make assumptions, in this case based on gender, but it's true of anything, right? I just know the statistics off the top of my head regarding gender. Will you take that being wrong 25% of the time to be right 75% of the time? Or do you treat everybody as individuals and ask? So you don't have to guess, and you can be right 95% of the time with just that one little extra step of effort. That's the philosophical conundrum. And I do think that political horse race reporting has become too dominant in our discourse. It has become, it's broken containment the same way, critical theory started in the law, and everybody can recognize that there are certain like identifiable points of systemic racism in various legal systems. And, we can work on that. But when it broke containment beyond where it started to fall apart. Same with political horse race identity politics. Pollsters use those demographics to get measurements, more precise measurements, but you can't predict outcomes on the individual level that way, right? Like, they do it to game, like, okay, if we get this much of this demographic, we can afford to lose this demographic and still win the election. You can't do that with small groups or with individuals. There's too much individuality at play. And this is where I get to the idea that we're like on third generation chronic gaslighting. And this is a big problem, right? Because people think they're expected to know based on things like this. Because of platitudes, about various things. They think they're expected to know. Instead of being okay with asking. People are so afraid of making a mistake that they just don't speak. And that doesn't just happen, right? And I think it's interesting that there's all these assumptions people think you have to make, and yet we have these discussions about pronouns and try to encourage people to, if you're not sure, ask, instead of misgendering someone, what pronouns do you prefer? People who are affected by that prefer that for the most part. We're trying to train people to ask there while expecting people to pick up on nonverbal cues everywhere else. And I think that the sheer amount of stupid culturally would drop precipitously if we just asked more questions and were really serious about the answers. And this is where we get into the practice of listening to understand versus listening to respond. And I plan to do a Wellness Wednesday on this because it's a subcategory of the issues of gaslighting. And the issue is that listening to understand is most productive in interpersonal stuff. It is not what's modeled in media. What we get modeled in media is listening to respond, except on the show The Rookie. Nathan Fillion's character, what's his name? Nolan. I always get it confused because it's like Nolan North took over Nathan Fillion's voice acting in Destiny, and Nathan Fillion is called Nolan. Inception. But Nathan Fillion's character on The Rookie is actually a good example of listening to understand. It's always that, hey, what you doing? Let's just talk for a minute. Like, how do you feel? I understand. Like, that must be really tough. He's like an avatar of empathy. I like that about the character. They've taken kind of a dark turn the most recent season, but you know what I mean. So much of what we see in media is listening to respond. Whether it be, in partisan political programming, activist sloganeering, or even these, these dramas increasingly aimed at teenagers again. It's about getting that quippy response, right? To move the dialogue along because the plot's imminently predictable. And so there's no modeling outside of The Rookie. And Superman and Lois, that new show, they do all right with that. But there's very little modeling in media of listening to understand. So how do we learn it? Well, you have to be around people who apply it, right? And we were talking about this on Twitch, that there is this tick in nerd communities. And it's easy to blame the internet. It's easy to blame social media. I'm not a fan of claiming that any media makes anyone do anything. Social media is a tool. It is not mind control. It does not make you communicate a particular way. It may make you feel like you can get away with stuff you want to do anyway, but it doesn't make you. And there's this thing I find that happens with nerds as a shorthand. People who are very invested in being smart. That's how I'm defining that for this. Instead of approaching a difference of perspective as, that's interesting you saw it that way, here's how I saw it. They start off, disagree, and then they give the reason. Now, do you see the difference between the two? Let me break it down in a more granular way in case you don't, okay? Someone expresses their opinion. I liked this show because. I don't like this song because. That's usually how people state things. Sometimes people do, this is trash, right? Fine. A lot of the times people are just going, I like this because. And someone pipes up with, disagree. Why are you disagreeing with another person's preference? That fails the Turing test, right? Like, you don't get to disagree with what someone likes. If someone's saying something is objectively bad or objectively good, that's one thing. But I know, at least in my experience, I'll be saying, here's the issue I have with this game, or here's what I'm struggling with this show, and I outline it. Disagree. But you don't get a vote on what I like or dislike, right? But that's how people have been trained to talk. And at that point, I have to decide whether I think this person is just not ideally socialized and we can have a discussion, or if I'm just going to go, really not worth my time. Makes sense, right? Here's the issue. I think a lot of those people that come on hard on social media are because that was the environment they were raised in. Everything was, as you know, Oron Darklord says, I just don't want to steal his zero sum. Everything is zero sum. Yes, Oron's a commenter here. Who doesn't like agree to disagree either? Because it's just for the same reasons I don't like it. If everything is zero sum and everything is just butting heads all the time, you don't learn anything about the other perspective, right? You're just performing for the peanut gallery. Instead of really going, okay, what am I trying to say here? What is this other person trying to tell me here? Where's the common ground between the two things? Because ultimately that's where you want to get, right? The discourse of late is, instead of, you know those platforming challenges in video games where everything's kind of empty, and then platforms rise up, and okay, I go there and I go there. That's kind of like conversations, right? You have a choice to just jump off into the abyss and have to start the level all over again, or you can actually jump where there's solid ground. Conversations are kind of like that. Like, all right, there's nothing to be gained in this wing of the conversation. Let's just steer it to where there's solid ground, right? Too many people are trying to play conversations that are platformers like a freaking fighting game, right? And everybody's just chipping each other's blocks online. And it's frustrating Because it's like, you're playing the game wrong. But they see it as a fighting game instead of a platformer. And I really think that the reason why is because of generations of chronic gaslighting. And if you missed Wednesday's video, it's people are gaslit by their parents because their parents were gaslit by their parents, who were gaslit by postmodern college education. They were broken and reformed. And I don't think there's anything wrong with engaging in postmodernist theories as an area of interest. I do think there's a problem with these belief systems and these ways of viewing the world that encourage people to believe, if in doubt, you are always wrong. You have to be told what the right way to think is. And there's just too much stuff coming out of postmodern critical theory that structurally is that, and we get back to that sensitivities from boss fight WSCMs, white, straight, cisgender males. This is me validating that sensitivity. I get why people feel that way. It is an impediment to understanding. And that requires, and when I say both sides here, I mean in individual conversations. There are many, many points of view here, and that's why zero-sum binaries don't work real well here. It is not the responsibility of anybody, white, straight, cisgender men included, to take on responsibility for things they did not do as an individual, that they are not participating in as an individual. I do agree that not all that men should not all be lumped into one group regarding any behavior. That's just false. And I think that when you presuppose that any group is, I mean, let's face it, like insisting that all men are sexual assaulters or sexual harassers waiting to happen, it's just hostile sexism against men. It just is. It's assuming the worst about individuals who identify as male, right? That there's no way around that if you follow the logic. That's not right. It's also not right to jump to the conclusion that somebody is saying that when they're not. If they're just saying, like, look, just because of the way this particular dynamic works, you can't completely understand it unless you're on the receiving end of it. And I'm consistent about that because there was a long time I didn't talk about men's issues because I didn't want to speak for men. The only reason I started doing it is because longtime viewers have said this is helpful. But again, you notice I'm not saying this is the way it is. I'm saying I have been told this is what has been communicated to me. What I understand is not the same thing at all. There's nothing wrong with saying an experience is different. And in some things, yes, a particular group has it worse. In another thing, another group has it worse. This is not an oppression race, right? Like, it's not that. Everybody's trying to get by. Everybody's trying to be the best person they possibly can be. Most people just want a life with less conflict and feeling like they're getting somewhere. I think too many people feel like they're just stuck in place and not moving forward. It is everyone's individual responsibility to be open to the idea that not every person they encounter is being attacked. Is attacking you. Sorry. And being attacked, but attacking you. But that's the problem with somebody who's been a victim of gaslighting, right? When someone has realized that they have been taken advantage of in that regard, in that way, makes it very difficult to trust going forward, because everything, like every little instance of the gaslighting seemed relatively benign. It was the long-term pattern of behavior that wore the person down. You know, it's not a question of one time somebody's having a bad day and didn't validate you. It's that this was a person who only validated you when they were manipulating you into giving them something they wanted, right? They weren't. It's very important that someone who cares about you validates you even when they disagree with you, or even when they're not happy with you. That's the sign of a healthy relationship. You can only be in a healthy relationship if you are giving that as well as expecting that. And that's the dynamic I think we need to get back. But it's this idea of, I can't let them do that to me again. And that's the gaslighting again. That's the victim of the gaslighting feeling like they're responsible for what happened to them, that they were somehow inadequate, wrong, or bad, instead of the onus being on the person who did the gaslighting. You are not a fool for giving someone benefit of the doubt. You are not stupid for giving someone a chance. In fact, if you give someone an opportunity, small, right? Small opportunity. I'm talking an opportunity to talk, right? And they blow it, that's on them, not you, right? Like, you did the good thing there. You did the right thing. You treated other people the way you wanted to be treated. They're the one that was an asshole. And it's okay to think other people are assholes. That's very difficult to internalize when you're made to feel like you are always the asshole, right? Self-gaslighting is a risk. Somebody asked me on Twitter whether self-gaslighting was a thing. I'm like, oh, it's definitely a thing. It's, after a while, when you have been effectively gaslit for long enough, you do the work for the abusive personality. They don't have to do anything anymore. You're doing it for yourself. There's a big difference between recognizing that there are things you need to work on and a sincerely rooted belief that you are not good enough or unworthy somehow. Anybody who is giving it their legitimate best and not trying to screw over other people is worthy. And there's something wrong with a system where so many people who I know are doing that, doing their flawed best, don't feel like they're good enough. But there's gotta be a way that we can take little steps together to get back that feeling of, yeah, I'm not perfect. Who is? You know, I put a video up on the wrong day this week. When I started YouTube, I'm gonna be, oh my god, that's so embarrassing, that's so bad. And I'm like, whatever, whoops, wee. Part of the reason I kind of let it all hang out that way is I want to set an example of, yeah, some days, some weeks, some months, some years, I'm gonna be a hot mess. I'm human. I'm not going to think that means I don't have a right to an opinion, that I'm not smart, that I don't have something meaningful to offer. Quite the opposite. And I want to model that, right? I think that's all anybody can do. But I'm not striving for perfection here. Like, that's what a lot of people don't realize about this channel. I do these videos breathless because I think we need more. It's authentic to me. I'm not cutting, clipping, making everything perfect. No, it's authentic. It's messy. It's flawed, but it's real, right? And we need those safe areas to land in the platformer of life. So we will definitely be doing more on gaslighting. I think that clearly there's interest there. Clearly there needs to be more work done there. I'm interested in where you'd like to go on that topic. That's what I'm looking for in the comments right now. So have at it. Let me know what you want to see. And if you're so inclined, help support this channel. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Oh my God, brain fart. Yeah. Thanks for watching and have a good weekend. I'm out of here.